Hello everyone, it's me, Ms. Ruiz, and I'm here today to discuss Chapter 4, the Introduction to the ICD-10-CM. Let's get started. Alright, learning outcomes. After this chapter, you should be able to explain the official conventions used in the ICD-10-CM, translate the official guidelines and how they impact the way codes are reported, use the alphabetic index in the ICD-10-CM properly, employ the information within the tabular list to determine the accurate code to report, distinguish which conditions mentioned in the documentation to report, and how to utilize what you've learned in this chapter to determine the correct diagnosis code to report. Here are some key terms for this chapter. I do have flashcards available in the flashcards section on Blackboard. Flashcards are for acute, adverse effect, alphabetic index, anatomical site, chronic, condition, confirmed, differential diagnosis, eponym, external cause, first listed, index to external causes, inpatient facility, manifestation, neoplasm table, non-essential modifiers, not elsewhere classifiable, not otherwise specified, other specified, outpatient services, principal diagnosis, sequela, also known as late effect, systemic condition, table of drugs and chemicals, tabular list of diseases and injuries, underlying condition, and unspecified. Alright, introduction to official conventions. So in the front of your ICD-10-CM book, you'll learn about the history of the ICD-10-CM as well as see the details about the 10th revision. Official coding conventions. In the front of your ICD-10-CM book, it explains how codes are presented. It'll also help you find the meanings for the symbols and notations that are used, such as punctuations, abbreviations, general notes, category notes, and additional characters that are required. Let's talk about some of this punctuation. So first we have our brackets. Brackets are in the tabular list. Now the difference in your manual is the tabular list, let's see if you can see, is all the color here. That's the tabular. The alphabetic index is the black and gray sections. So when you see brackets in the tabular list, they provide alternate terms. Slanted brackets usually surround a secondary code, so one that will have to be coded secondary. Parentheses are throughout, so you can find those in the index and the tabular. They feature non-essential modifiers. These are terms that can be found in your documentation, that may be in your documentation, but does not have to be there, hence the non-essential part, in order for you to use that code or whatever it's with. Alright, colons in the tabular emphasize additional details, much like they do in CPT. Alright, abbreviations. You'll see NEC. That stands for not elsewhere classifiable. So in this case, it means that the physician provided more details not included in any code description. So that means we have more information than what the coding manual has. Alright, not otherwise specified is the other side of that coin. So it means the physician did not provide additional details. So it means that it may be more information, but we were not given that information. Remember, as coders, we do not diagnose, and the cardinal rule is if it's not documented, it didn't happen, therefore we can't code it. So that's what if you have a not otherwise specified, usually in these cases, if you have access to the physician or the documenter, you want to query them and find out if you can get more details to help you in your coding process. Alright, general notes. These are all very important, also on flashcards. Alright, includes. These are additional terms also reported with this code. So say you're given one term in bold, but you'll see underneath in regular text other terms that are also included in that. Excludes one means not reported with this code. Whenever you see an excludes note with a code, it means that excludes one code cannot be reported on the same claim as the one that note is with. It's either one or the other. So a good way, excludes one means you can only use one. Excludes two may need a different or additional code. So these would be things that may present together Over time, they've seen a pattern, so the excludes 2 lets you know that those two may be coded together. Code first, exactly that. It's an instruction. A different code must be reported with this code and be reported first. So code first, if you see it with like a B20 or something, you know that that's going to have to go, that other code's going to have to go before that B20, even though it won't. Alright, use additional code. A different code must be reported with this code and reported after the above code. So use additional code means that the code that you're looking at, your main code that you went from the index to verify and confirm in your tabular, that is the first code, and they're telling you you need an additional, so it's telling you what your secondary code would be. Code also means to review the documentation to determine if additional code is required. So whenever you see a code also, that's not an instruction that you also have to code it. You can only code that also if you have the documentation to support it. If it is not written in your documentation, you can ignore that whole little section then. But if you do have that documentation, you must code it, because our rule also is to code to the greatest specificity. Alright, category notes. Informational notes under the description of the 3 characters at the top of a subsection in the tabular list. These notes share important information and clarifications that you need to know before you determine the code or codes to report. Once you've used your index and followed your indents to get to your code, and you go to the back to the tabular to verify, not only are you going to look around that code for extra notes, you're also going to check that category. And as you see here, it says the 3 character code. So that is the 3 characters that come before that point. Now, where that starts is where that category is. And there can also be notes there that apply to anything within that category. Alright, additional characters required. A lot of times you'll see a hyphen. A hyphen is used in the alphabetic index to indicate that additional characters are required, that is not a complete code. For this class, you want to make sure that you are not coding from the index. That's another rule. Never code from the index. You always want to confirm and make sure that your total is complete and that you've checked all your notes. So the hyphen will alert you to an incomplete code. Box with a check mark or other symbol. Located on the left of the code in the tabular list, a symbol notifies you that an additional character is required. Alright, official guidelines for coding and reporting. ICD-10-CM official guidelines for coding and reporting. Usually in the front of your ICD-10-CM book, they are rules and directions for accurate reporting of diagnosis codes. And they can help you make certain that the codes you report are presented in their legal manner and support clear communication with all parties involved in the care and reimbursement of patients. Guidelines. These are some guidelines I would like to talk about that are in the front of your ICD-10-CM. It's the 2023 ICD-10-CM official guidelines for coding and reporting. These are each of the different sections. So in section 1, subsection A, you can find conventions. Section 1, subsection B, you'll find general coding guidelines. Section 1, subsection C, you'll find chapter-specific coding guidelines. In section 2, you will find the selection of principal diagnosis. This is our first listed code. Section 3 will be reporting additional diagnoses. And then section 4 is diagnostic coding and reporting guidelines for outpatient services. Appendix 1, you will see presenting on admission reporting guidelines. Alphabetic index and ancillaries. So, an index to diseases and injuries, alphabetic index, suggests codes are in alphabetical order by short descriptions. The neoplasm table, suggested codes for confirmed neoplasms, are in alphabetic order by anatomical site. And then the table of drugs and chemicals, suggested codes for adverse effects or poisonings are in alphabetic order by the name of the substance. Index to external causes suggests codes for how a patient became injured or poisoned. So anytime there is an injury to a person, you're going to probably need to use that external causes code as well. This just paints a broader picture of how this person got injured. Right? 4.4, the tabular list. All codes in the code set are listed by the code. So first, in alphabetic order of first character. Then alphanumeric order of the following characters. Includes complete code descriptions. Includes symbols and notations to support accurate coding. Which conditions to code. Only those diagnoses, signs, and symptoms attended to by the physician during this encounter. You'll also want to include all conditions that the physician must consider in determination of a treatment plan, such as a systemic condition. If you have a diagnosis, you're going to code your diagnosis. You don't code signs and symptoms that are in relation to the said diagnosis. However, if the signs and symptoms are different or completely unrelated from the diagnosis, then signs and symptoms can be coded. Chapter summary. As you look back over this chapter, you should notice one very important thing. ICD-10-CM book will almost always guide you to the correct code. The alphabetic index will guide you to the correct chapter and subsection in the tabular list, so you can read all of the notations and the symbols. Evaluate all the options and determine the best, most accurate code. If no codes seem to match the attending physician's notes, just go back and keep looking. Number 1. Abstract the main terms from the physician's documentation so that you can determine the best, most accurate code or codes. 2. In case of an injury, poisoning, or adverse effect, you will need to add an external cause code. When you're abstracting from your documentation, select the term that best starts with what is going on. For example, if you have acute bronchitis, it's not going to be acute because acute is the type of bronchitis. Because if we have bronchitis, okay, is it acute or chronic? See how we have to take that main term in order to find out the others? So we want to make sure that we're using that main term. That main term is not anything that can be described by something else, like acute can be. Your coding index can help you an extreme amount. The main thing to remember is to watch the indents. You will see in your alphabetic index that you have 2 gray lines that run parallel to each other down each column of the page. Make sure that you're following your different indents. I'll be sure to try to include a note or something here kind of describing the different indents to make sure that you're following everything correctly. Remember, you cannot go in or down or in without verifying your first term first. Hey everyone, okay, so now I want to go ahead and break down a section in the index to kind of help you understand the indents. So, first thing we notice is this is a great example because we have many different indents. So now you're going to learn the rules on how to properly use it. So as you can see here, we have fracture, non-traumatic, not elsewhere classified, or NEC. The first thing, if you notice, we have those gray lines that go up and down here. Those are your markers to help you understand where you are on the indent. Is it a first place indent, like atypical? You notice under fracture, non-traumatic, NEC, atypical is our only first indent. So, once we've decided, sometimes you'll have one here and one here. As you can see with fracture pathological, ankle is on that line. But traumatic is not. Traumatic is under fracture pathological, and ankle would be a new subcategory. So here, let's look at fracture atypical. Then we're going to a location. Only thing that's here is femur. If you notice, we don't have anything else in this section right here. Femur is our only indent. That's the only place we have to go. So as long as our documentation is specifying femur, we can go down. Then if you notice, we have another question with the next indent, because now we have 2. We have complete and we have incomplete. Notice I'm not going inside and reading any of this yet. Why? Because I haven't given myself permission to. I have to first decide, is it complete or is it incomplete? Notice these are both on that second gray line. That helps me know that they're in the same order, they're on the same level. I've got to look there before I can go in. So let's say we have complete. We're going to go with that one because we have more examples. So say we're on complete, and then you see here our next options are going to be oblique or transverse. Those are our only two options. So let's say we have transverse. Well, is it documented that it's the right or the left side? If not, we got to go to M84.756. Notice this check mark means this is the incomplete code. We cannot assume that this is a complete code that can be used in another rule. Never code from the index. So from here, if we have left identified in our documentation, remember, we can only code what's been documented. If it hasn't been documented, it didn't happen. So if it's on the left side, then that would send us to M84.755. This is an example of letting the index do the work for you. If you're ever back in the colorful section, the tabular, right here, you're not sure where you're supposed to be, then that means you got to go back to the index and you need to redo that process again to make sure that you're looking at the right thing. Now, some of these sections can get really big and spread out. Sometimes the bold to bold, which is where I tell you to read from bold to bold before you even go in on this first term, can span pages. So you can have multiple columns, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 columns that are under the same bold term, but they might have different first subterms. And sometimes the subterms will span columns as well. So it's always a good idea to look at the top of the page or at the top of the column you're in, and it will always tell you where you're at. So fracture, non-traumatic, atypical, femur. So if it was continuing, it would let you know that it's continuing, and then it would pick back up. So I want to make sure that you guys are comfortable with how this works. Sometimes something with a straight edge, whether it be like a ruler, or I had a student last night talk about she used an index card, something with that flat line to help you move in so you know exactly what you should be looking at. If you have any questions, just go ahead and reach out and let me know. I'm here to help. Until next time, I'll see ya. Bye.